This book is full. 1,200 stamps, licked and pressed down by hand, the way you might have done it as a kid at the kitchen table. It sat in a drawer for decades. And on October 4th, 2020, the company that printed it declared it worth exactly nothing. So this file has one question to answer. How does something more than half the country once treated as money end up as trash in a drawer? And who decided your saving was over? The file opens in 1896. A traveling silverware salesman named Thomas Sperry walks into a Milwaukee department store and sees it giving little stamps away with every sale. He does the math on the spot. One store, one gimmick was small. But a stamp company that served hundreds of stores at once? That could be enormous. So Sperry and a partner, Shelley Hutchinson, start selling green stamps to merchants, and the merchants hand them to you. The deal is simple, and it is clever. You shop, you collect. 10 cents spent, 1 stamp back. You paste them into a book of 1,200 and carry it to a redemption center. A man named Carl Willis printed those stamps by the millions.
Usually, kids would get the job of putting the stamps in the book. They would lick 'em and stick 'em, they called it.
By 1964, this is not a promotion anymore. It is the water everyone is swimming in. More than 60% of American shoppers are saving S&H Green Stamps. The scale gets hard to picture. Over 1 trillion stamps sold since 1896, a number so large the Supreme Court itself would later write it into the record. By its own account, the company printed 3 times as many stamps as the U.S. Post Office and mailed out a rewards catalog people called the biggest single publication in the country. Andy Warhol painted the green stamps in 1962, right alongside his soup cans. That is how far into the American bloodstream they had soaked. Whole towns saved together. In 1966, Pennsylvania school children pooled 5.4 million stamps and bought 2 gorillas, one for a zoo in Pittsburgh, one for Erie. This is the part everyone remembers: the licking, the pasting, the lamp you finally carried home. But a stamp is a promise. And a promise only works as long as someone chooses to keep it. Watch what happens when keeping it stops paying. Here is the math the shopper never saw. A merchant paid S&H about $2.65 for 1,200 stamps. A filled book bought the shopper somewhere between $2.86 and $3.31 in goods. The pennies in between were the whole business. And there was a second, quieter profit. S&H sold over 1 trillion stamps. About 86% were ever redeemed. The other 14, roughly 1 stamp in 7, was never cashed in at all. Those stamps cost the company nothing to honor, because no one ever came to collect. That gap had a name in the trade: breakage. Every unlicked promise was pure profit, and it was built into the arithmetic from the first stamp. So the more you saved and never spent, the better the company did. By the mid-60s, not everyone was charmed. The grocers who footed the bill turned on the stamps. The president of A&P, S&H's biggest adversary, called them a drag on civilization. S&H fought back the only way it knew: full-page ads aimed straight at the woman with the shopping list. One warned her in print that the stores dropping stamps were the ones to watch.
Watch out, Mrs. Shopper. Someone may be trying to fool you about trading stamps.
But the real decision, the one this file turns on, was not about ads. It was about control. To keep the machine spinning, S&H needed one thing to stay true. Your book could only ever be spent one place, with S&H. Across the country, shoppers had started their own little markets, stamp exchanges, where you could swap brands or cash a book out freely. S&H moved to shut them down. It sued merchants who trafficked in its stamps. The fine print in every book said the stamps were never yours. They stayed the property of S&H. So there it was. The company that turned your loyalty into money spent years in court making sure that money could never be freely traded, freely cashed, or freely yours. An incomplete book, the rules said, has no redemption value. In 1968, the government said no. The Federal Trade Commission ordered S&H to stop crushing the exchanges. S&H fought it to the Supreme Court, and in 1972, the court handed down a landmark on consumer protection, then let S&H off on a technicality. The empire did not fall in a courtroom, though. It fell at a gas pump. In the winter of 1973, the oil embargo hit, and the lines wrapped around the service stations. In the trade, the service stations were something like a third of the volume. And a station with a line out the door has no reason to hand you anything.
In 1972 or 1973, we had the energy crisis, and there were lines around the service stations with people wanting gasoline.
The stations pulled their S&H signs. The supermarkets discovered they could just cut prices instead. And the great stamp machine began, quietly, to run down. By the late 80s, fewer than 100 stores still gave green stamps. And here the story turns cold. In 1981, the family that had run S&H for nearly 60 years, the Beinecke's, sold out. The buyer was a conglomerate called Baldwin United. And by one insider's account, Baldwin was not buying the stamps at all.
They weren't interested in redeeming stamps or selling stamps. They were interested in the cash account there.
The company sat on a mountain of cash, money set aside to honor all those unredeemed books. Buy the company, get the reserve. The loyalty of millions of families had become, on a balance sheet, a pile of money someone else could walk away with. Baldwin United went bankrupt within a few years. S&H got passed hand to hand, through a reorganization, through a holding company, through Leucadia National, a trophy nobody quite knew what to do with anymore. In 1999, it came full circle. The company was sold, for a modest gain, back to a Beinecke, Walter, a great-grandson of Thomas Sperry himself. By then, only about 100 stores in America still gave the stamps. He had a plan for the internet age. In 2000, the paper stamps went digital, rebranded as Green Points. 1 million accounts signed up. It was going to be loyalty for a new century.
We had higher hopes, probably like a lot of people, about what would happen online.
For 20 more years, the old paper stamps hung on, redeemable by mail for pennies. 1,200 of them worth about $1.20. Not much, but not nothing. A book was still a book. And then, on October 4th, 2020, that stopped too. The program was shut for good, and every remaining book of green stamps was declared formally worth nothing. The old rule had come for everyone. An incomplete book has no redemption value, and now, so did a complete one. So, who decided your saving was over? Not one villain. A gas crisis nobody planned. A family that took its money and left. A buyer who wanted the cash, not the promise. And a rule, written at the top, that the stamps were never fully yours. Where is it now? The brand never fully died. A small digital revival still trades under the S&H Green Stamps name today, a modern echo, not the old paper machine. As for the paper itself, in 2006, one of Warhol's green stamp paintings sold at auction for $5.1 million. The picture of the money outlived the money. The fortune it threw off is still standing too, a marble rare book library at Yale, built with green stamp money that will outlast every drawer in America. The company got its monument. The savers got a rule in fine print. Which brings us back to the drawer. If there is still a book of green stamps somewhere in your house, a kitchen drawer, a shoebox, your mother's old desk, I'd like to know one thing. What were you saving for? The lamp? The bicycle? The thing you filled 1,200 stamps to earn? Tell us down below. We read every one. And then we'll close the file on this one and pull the next folder.